Okay, welcome to the extended 4th of July weekend edition of Stump the Stars Jewish Style. For those of you who pop in on us along the way, either tonight or sometime later, we welcome you. Thank you for joining us. It is also, to add to the holiday festivities, it's also Rosh Chodesh, as we inaugurated.
Please tell them what Rosh Chodesh is.
I will.
No
As
idea.
we inaugurated that holiday celebration, in fact, last night at our Shabbat service. Rosh Chodesh, for those of you who are not familiar with it, is the new month celebration that's part of the traditional Jewish calendar. We were told back in the book of Numbers to make a big deal out of the beginning of each new month. So we do something special as a result of that, or the traditional communities do in fact do that. And we did that here, of course, last night as well. So, a new month begins, and another Stump the Stars Jewish Style begins. But let's begin it the way we usually do, by talking to God. Father, thanks for this opportunity to be together, to just share some stuff, to interact with people's questions that they've sent in, and so we'd ask for clarity as we interact with those, and we would ask that it would not just be stuff to, how should we put it? Stuff just to talk about and think about, but stuff to integrate into our lives so we can live more effectively before you and with you because of what we interact with. And for this we're grateful because of Yeshua, our Messiah. Amen. Okay.
We beg forgiveness about John's shirt.
Yeah.
If you're old enough to remember 60s, just think you're
There we go. Look at it now.
psychedelic.
Now it looks like
Stop
now it
it,
looks great.
stop
Anyhow, I'm sorry. Fascinated by my
We're
own
both
shirt.
ex-TV majors, and we know this would be bad. So,
Okay. Picking up on some questions that we've had from previous sessions, but we did not get a chance to get to. This one goes all the way back to the beginning of May, so we're finally getting to it. And I will go through the question and we'll interact with it the best that we can. But as is our custom, for those of you who are with us, if you have questions, you get priority because you're sitting here with us. So
I'm good.
you're good. Jessica?
no
You're good.
questions yet.
Okay. All right, here we go.
You'll have some now.
I have always heard that the bride of Christ are his believers. And then the questioner puts the Kedushim, question mark, building on the translation that the question is derived from, which is the Tree of Life version, which Patrice and I had a chance to do some translation for as well. Anyhow, I have always heard that the bride of Christ are his believers, the Kedushim. But this says the bride is wearing the fine linen, which are the righteous deeds of the Kedushim. Kedushim is just going back to the Hebrew for what's often translated saints or believers in this particular case. Interesting that the questioner puts it as the bride of Christ. We would probably refer to it as the bride of the Messiah. So the question is, who is the bride in this passage? Also, who's attending the wedding? Some beings are invited to the wedding. Are they just angels? Yeshua said that no one comes to the Father but by me, so I don't think it's people. Any insight you can give on this passage is very appreciated. And then the passage is quoted, so let me read that passage as it comes from the Tree of Life version. Revelation 19, verses 6 to 9. Then I heard something like the voice of a great multitude, great crowd, the roar of rushing waters, or like the rumbling of powerful thunder, saying, Hallelujah, for Adonai Elohei Tzevaot reigns, the Lord of hosts reigns. Let us rejoice and be glad and give glory to him, for the wedding of the Lamb has come, and his bride has made herself ready. She was given fine linen to wear, bright and clean. For the fine linen is the righteous deeds, or the righteous acts, or as we would call it in our own cultural tradition, religious tradition, the mitzvot of the Kedushim, the followers. Then the angel says to me, Write, how fortunate are those who have been invited to the wedding banquet of the Lamb. he also tells me these are the true words of God. Okay, so there you have the scope of the question.
Can I say something
Well,
preliminarily?
I was hoping you would.
We in 20 and 21st century America are not adept at understanding metaphorical language, the language of metaphors. In other words, when we're using metaphors, what is that metaphor for? What's the purpose? How are metaphors used? Can there be multiple metaphors in passages? Yeah. In fact, with the expanse of literature in this one book, I think it's fair to say there's a ton of metaphors. The whole concept of the bride and the wedding is a series of metaphors. Please keep in mind that the bride metaphor in the older covenant may or may not have anything to do with the metaphor of the bride and the wedding in the newer covenant. You're dealing with two time periods. You're dealing with time periods perhaps 1,000 years apart, and you're dealing with two languages too. So it's really important also that you don't point to things in the text and say, well, this word is this over here, and that word is this over here, and that word is this over here. Because by their definition, metaphors cannot be broken apart into their various nouns. Don't break apart the nouns in a metaphor. You should see the metaphor as much as possible as a whole concept or an idea. And so to break apart a metaphor, it's like looking up an idiom word by word in your dictionary, and the one I like to use usually is the idiom. When I got home late last night, my mother hit the ceiling. That is a phrase that does not mean what the individual words mean. You cannot break that apart into its individual words and then put the words together and understand what it says, because it's an idiom. It means something really, really different than what the words in the dictionary mean by themselves. And metaphors often function in this way. Just trying to take a step back from when I'm putting my finger on the word bride in the older covenant or the newer covenant, is it referring to the same exact thing? Is it two different things? What part of a bride's experience is the same or not the same? Yeah, therein lies madness, to quote. I believe Shakespeare said.
Sounds like Shakespearean, yeah.
So it's important, sort of in a certain way, to open up your mind to the possibilities that this isn't about the dictionary meaning of these words. Okay, thank you.
Just to build or elaborate a little further on what Patrice has shared about metaphor, what she shared about metaphor applies to parables as well. In one sense,
That's an extended metaphor.
Yeah, parables are related to metaphors. So don't assume that you can take each part and identify each part as having to refer to this, that, or the other thing, rather than just contributing to the parable as a whole, the scene as a whole, or in this case, the metaphor as a whole.
Like, for instance, to give an example, I think it helps when we give examples.
By all means.
The prodigal son. So the prodigal son is this, and the father is this, and the brother is this. Yeah, that's not how you're going to find out the meaning of things. In fact, you're just comparing it to something else, or several something else's, which may not shed any light on the parable at all. Anyway, is that fair enough to give an example?
Fair enough. Now, to complicate this particular question in its setting is, in addition to various kinds of language usage and literary styles that you find throughout the biblical texts, because they do comprise various literary styles and forms of literature, is this whole concept of what we call genre forms of literature. You have forms of literature within the biblical texts that are what we would call narrative. You would have some that you would call, to use a technical term, didactic or teaching material. Not that the narratives can't teach, don't misunderstand that, but it's the kind of material that you're being presented. You have poetic material. You have within the biblical text wisdom literature that has its own kind of characteristics. You have in the Newer Testament something that is, they're often called the letters or epistles, but basically they should be seen against the background of the responsa literature of traditional Judaism, in which rabbis were asked questions by communities, and they would respond to these communities, and often they would respond to these communities with the use of letters. And let's see. Oh, we forgot prophetic material. Don't misunderstand what prophetic material is. Most people think it has to do with looking into the future, predicting the future. But in the biblical text, the prophetic material was basically the preaching, I'll leave it at that. The preaching, possibly the teaching of the Torah to the various groups of people that the prophets were speaking to or writing to. There are some predictive materials in there, but by and large, it's preaching kinds of materials. And then, of course, there is what we would call prophetic material, which is actually talking about the future and what the future holds. But just because they're called prophets does not mean that they are predicting the future in everything that they write and say. They are, by and large, teaching or preaching the Torah and adapting it to the people of their communities. Okay, so there's that. Then you have what's called apocalyptic material. The apocalyptic material has as its foundations in the biblical texts the book of Ezekiel, the book of Daniel. You've got sections of Isaiah that appear to be apocalyptic, or Jeremiah. But, and I guess we'd call Zechariah
Yes, a lot of apocalypse in it.
Yeah. Apocalyptic literature really blossomed during the time of the Second Temple period. The book of Revelations, or the book of Revelation, is clearly apocalyptic material. And it's apocalyptic material that is very much like the style of the apocalyptic literature of the Second Temple period. Apocalyptic, without getting too complex or too complicated in the discussion, apocalyptic material tended to use large or cosmic kind of imagery, or as we called it metaphor before, as part of its style. And the images weren't intended to be interpreted piece by piece, as too often they are. Okay? So that's just a general introduction to the various forms of literature, and this particular question is building on apocalyptic literature. Okay? Having set the stage in that sense, there's further background that needs to be brought to bear here, and that is twofold. There is a great deal of wedding imagery that's found within the framework and the context of the Newer Testament. In a couple of our courses, we expand on this, and in fact, the course that I just finished teaching this past semester, Jewish Roots and Foundations of Scripture, Part 2, or the Apostolic Writings, spent the better part of a whole class session just unfolding some of the wedding imagery that's behind some of the biblical texts of the Newer Testament. I'm going to give you two examples. One is easy to find, one is not as easy to find. John chapter 14, which is a wonderful text, which reminds me, I didn't even address the whole issue of the Gospels as a literary form. Well,
Okay. Do you think you need to do that
no.
right now?
No, because I'm going to use this as a commercial. Because I'm going to address exactly that in the fall, in the class that I'm teaching in the fall, the Gospels in the Jewish context. So, see, I set that up for a great commercial. Anyhow, just to be really brief about it, the Gospels are a unique kind of form that is actually a combination of various forms. For more on that, see me in the fall. Okay, John chapter 14. Yeshua says, don't be troubled. You believe in God, believe in me, because in effect, as he says further on in John chapter 14, as he's already spelled out through the rest of the gospel, he is himself God. So if you're going to believe that, so believe wholeheartedly then in what I'm about to say. He says, I'm going to prepare a place for you, and if I go, I will come again and take you to myself. That is heavily laden with wedding imagery. That is exactly what the grooms of those days would say to their brides-to-be after a formal engagement. They would say, I'm going to set up a place, a wedding home, or a room with, or a wedding, or our own personal part of the larger family home, whatever the particular context was in those days. And when I'm done doing this, I'll come, and he says, take you to myself. The term itself is take, that is what the groom would say to the bride, because the wedding involved the taking of the bride by the groom. So Yeshua is using wedding language as well as wedding imagery there. And he's saying, once I've built the wedding home for us, I will come and get you, and then we'll have the wedding ceremony, and then we will be married. In the meantime, we are engaged, so keep that in mind in your interactions with others. Okay, so that's hidden within John 14, but it's not really hidden to the readers of that day. I think it's Matthew 25, not Matthew 24, but you have the parable of the 10 virgins. It's not really 10 virgins, it's the 10 bridesmaids, to be precise. And half of them are prepared, and half of them aren't, as the parable goes on. But that too is built on how the wedding would the wedding would take place in those days. Often the groom would come to claim his bride for the wedding ceremony at the end of a work day, and it would be a parade accompanied by celebration, accompanied by all kinds of lights. And the bride would not necessarily know when this would take place, because she wouldn't necessarily know when the groom had finished doing the work he needed to do to prepare the home for the two of them. So the bride and the bridesmaids needed to be prepared for whenever this would take place. And in Matthew 24-25, half the bridesmaids were prepared, half they were not. And Yeshua uses this as a way to convey to us that we are to make sure we are prepared and ready for whenever he comes to reclaim us for himself at his second coming. So that's all part of wedding imagery that is built into our biblical texts. All right. Now, frequently, when people talk about the bride of the Messiah, or as the usual term is found in Christianity, the bride of Christ, they are referring to those who are Yeshua's followers. They assume that's who makes up the bride. Okay? And in this particular text, a question, it says, as the text says, but this says the bride is wearing the fine linen, which is the righteous deeds, the mitzvot of the believers, or the kedushim, or the saints. So who is the bride in this passage? All right, remember what Patrice said at the very outset. You can't take a metaphor and take it apart piece by piece by piece by piece and identify each
Well,
piece.
you can, but it won't lead you into truth.
Yes, it won't.
You can do whatever you want. It's a free country, but
yeah, you can do that, but it's not going to get you to an understanding of what's being communicated.
not necessarily, no.
No. Okay, so it is just a general image, metaphor, and in this case it is apocalyptic, as I'll unfold in just a minute, of the event of our coming to our full place with Yeshua when he returns, and as he said in John 14, takes us to be with him.
Like your destiny.
Thank you, I like that. It's your destiny. All right, now, by way of background, you need to understand two other things at this point that are part of the context. Ready? I'm going to do thing one and thing two.
Yes, sir.
For those of you who are aware of that, that was another literary reference of sorts.
Dr. Seuss.
So feel free to chuckle away. So thing one is this, and this is very current in our thinking at this particular stage in our readings from the biblical text in the synagogue. We are reading in synagogues around the world through the book of Numbers. The book of the experience of Numbers, of what's described in the book of Numbers, is Israel's wilderness walk with God. And early on in the readings for Numbers, if I remember correctly, is a Haftarah section from the book of Jeremiah chapter 2. If not directly connected to the book of Numbers, then slightly before the book begins. But there is a strong connection to the book of Numbers. I do think it's one of the Haftarah from the Haftarot from the book of Numbers. That goes along with the book of Numbers. It's Jeremiah 2. And in Jeremiah 2, God said to Israel, like a young bride, you followed me in the wilderness. Okay, several things to remind ourselves of, and I remind the crew here of this on a regular basis. God's perspective, what took place in the wilderness, was that it was his honeymoon experience with his people. The people who became his bride or his people at Mount Sinai, which is why, as we celebrated it here a couple weeks ago, and throughout the Sephardic community, Shavuot is seen as a renewal of vows. It's a celebration of the wedding of the people of God with God himself. And then, of course, that would mean that the wilderness then is seen as the honeymoon experience with God, and God describes it that way. As a young bride, you followed me through the wilderness. So, we too often misread the wilderness experience because we don't catch that imagery that's part of it that begins with Mount Sinai, continues with the wilderness walk with God.
And so I think that it's normative within Christianity, no matter what denomination you are, to often hear about, you call them the wilderness wanderings, their experiences in the desert as being the opposite of a honeymoon,
Yep.
of disobedience, of stupidity, for lack of common sense, for like we talked about last night, rebellion in certain cases, and it's not portrayed in this idea of a honeymoon, which is, I think, maybe not overt anti-Semitism because it's been taught over and over so much like this that they can't think outside the box. But once you start thinking outside the box about what Jeremiah shares, God enjoyed this experience to get his wife away from slavery and bring his yife into a place where there's only God to be in charge. Mm-hmm. I mean, Moses and Aaron are there, and the tribes each have their leaders. But really, there's no government authority over them like there was in Egypt, as there would be in the future, where God can speak directly to Moses and the people, and the people can experience God's care for them, mm-hmm. which is also part of the honeymoon. It's this. I'm just going to say, and you're the best. But I'm going to say something. Honeymoons are not always moonlight and roses. There's adjustments. There are big, fat adjustments. There is, oh, honey, I love you. What did you just do? And it comes very soon. It's not like, it doesn't wait until after you get home, after the 10 days you're gone or something. No, it can happen the very same day. Speaking for myself.
Yeah, I was going to say, I was about to interject it for us. I managed to throw something at her the very first night, right after the wedding.
Yes, he did. And I was going, in my mind, I didn't say this out loud. I'm going, what have I done? This has been a big fat mistake. But I don't think our experience is uncommon.
No.
I think our experience is normal for people who haven't lived together before they got married. We never lived together before. If you have lived together with a new person, and it could be a roommate, it could be a college roommate, and you never had to share a room before, you can think each other's okay, but they're still a stranger, and there's going to be toes will be stepped on, and things will be said that the other person, you didn't intend them to be mean or spiteful, but to the person listening to them, it was very hurtful. So those are the kinds of things that can happen on a honeymoon. It's good. It's a good thing, but it's an adjustment. And notice also, I never hear people say this enough. In the experience in the wilderness, this population has been slaves. For how many years? They have been
years, yeah.
slaves. They could not get up in the morning unless they were told what they had to do that day and how soon they had to do it. They couldn't get food unless it was all gotten for them, and the government was in charge of their lives, and the slave owners were in charge of their lives, and they couldn't choose they weren't a group that was self-reliant. They were the opposite of self-reliant. They couldn't say what they're going to do from one day to the next. They were told what to do. And that involves, once again, you see this in our own American experience. People are freed from slavery. Oh, good. And then it starts being hard because you're happy. Woo, we're happy. We're free. And now what do? We wake up in the morning and what do we do? So all these things about the experience in the desert we have to remember. And the thing we should forget, here's the thing, lots of things to remember, here's the thing to forget, that this was a time of lawlessness, of disobedience, of rejecting God, of being spiteful, having bickering with our leaders. Did all those things happen? Yes. But is that the point of the wanderings? To show how bad the Jewish people were. Many times I get the impression that we can't wait to jump on how bad they reacted. And we would say, but I would never act like they did in the wilderness. Never. I would always be thankful for what God gave me. I would always. Yeah, except if you ever have to be in charge of a group of people, you see how many minutes go by, about 5 minutes, until people start exhibiting exactly what we're talking about in the wilderness wanderings. Okay, I'm sorry. Did you?
No,
I sort of interrupted you.
No, that's the direction I was about to head.
Okay.
The time in the wilderness, you as God does as a honeymoon, but the main point was, as Patrice has elaborated on it, it was a time in which the two parties who had just gotten married could acclimate with one another, get to know each other. So this was a time of getting to know each other. This was a time of sorting out or beginning to lay the groundwork for the relationship between the two parties. So the wilderness wanderings, or the wilderness walk, or the wilderness journey, or the wilderness adventure, all of which describes it each of which describes it fairly well, was a time of the people of Israel getting to know their God and the beginning of that relationship with their God. And that's what you've got to see. And each of these experiences that are mentioned in the book of Numbers, just by way of a quick perspective or paradigm shifter, how quickly do you think you can read through the book of Numbers?
I don't even know how many chapters it is right off the top of my head. Do you have an estimate for us, do you? Are you doing the speed reading method, or are you?
It's 30-some chapters, isn't it?
Yeah, I think so.
Maybe.
Yeah, I see 26, 29,
No, I'm over there.
33.
Is it 34 chapters?
Yeah, it could be.
Sorry, 36 chapters. I should know that because chapter 36 is the Daughters of Zelophehad, part 2. So 36 chapters. So you could probably read through the book of Numbers in an hour, hour and a half.
Yeah, especially if you skip like what's in 33, which is they left this town and they went to another town. They would left this oasis, they went to you can skip those because unless you're doing a study on each of these places, it's not going to really help you.
Other places they went to.
So skip that.
All right,
and
so
get to the
even if
plot.
it takes you 2 or 3 hours to read the book of Numbers, how long did this particular period last in the lives of the Israelis?
40 years.
It was 40 years from the time they left Egypt to the time they arrived. The book of Numbers is probably like 38, maybe 39. But let's round it off, 40. So 2 hours worth of material, of which not all of it, of which much of it is not negative, is all that was negative that was described of these 40 years of experience and relationship building. But when it's taught, it almost, as Patrice said, frequently when it's taught, it's as if this whole 40 years was jam-packed with this kind of experience.
And that's all it was.
And that's all it was. And again, so 2 hours out of 40 years.
And God was.
And
go ahead.
And I was going to say, and not all the 2 hours that you read about are negative. Most of it's not.
And God is really cheesed off about them during the whole time period. He really has to discipline them. And here's what I dislike most. If I hear a message from the wilderness time, and the summary of the message is, those dumb Jews, don't be like them. If that's a summary of what you have heard about the teaching, run from that place. Because that in and of itself, you have not understood what God is trying to tell you by having this be in the scripture. The lesson is not, those dumb Jews should have known better. They should have known this and this and this. I don't see how they could possibly fail to understand this and this and this, and I don't see how they could possibly not worship God here. So don't do that. That is the worst kind of anti-Jewish teaching that I can think of, because there are so many positive lessons. And the idea is we're all like them. It's not them and I'm good. No, them, they do exactly the same things that I do. And that has to be what we get out of this. Otherwise, why have it in the scriptures?
So, the wilderness adventure or journey is a honeymoon that's an elongated honeymoon, so to speak. It's a time of the bride and groom getting to know each other.
Oh, we got one coming in.
Right at the very end of this. Okay, cool.
Well, I'll just leave it like that.
Okay, that's fine. Now, that's just part of the context that ties into this particular Revelation 19 passage and the concept of what's often called the bride of Christ or the bride of the Messiah. I should say one other thing that's part of the context of the bride and groom getting to know each other. By the Second Temple period, general wedding custom was that frequently the bride and groom, when they show up on the wedding scene, would have a time either right before or right after the wedding ceremony itself of an uninterrupted 7 days to spend in, if you want to call it the honeymoon suite, just to begin to get to know each other before they even were more fully involved in the whole wedding scene and the whole business of married life. So that's part of the background. Another part of the background by the time of the Second Temple period is the anticipation of the great wedding banquet of the future. And the anticipation of the great wedding banquet of the future was a way of describing how should I put it? And this will, in a sense, become a segue into the second question. That of describing the Messianic age or the Messianic era. that was described as the banquet of the Messiah, or the Messiah's wedding banquet. Okay, so that too is part of the overall context that you have informing this particular text from Revelation 19 and the whole understanding of the concept of the bride of the Messiah. So, who is the bride in this passage? We needed all of that to come around to be able to answer that. The bride in this passage is all who can be described as believers, kedushim, or to use the Old English, saints. That involves people from the time of Adam and Eve to the time when time ends, who are followers of Messiah. It's not an exclusive reference to those after Yeshua's death and resurrection who became followers of Yeshua down through the ages. It includes them, but that's not the whole of them. And of course then, in the concept of this metaphor, this image, if this is who the bride is, then what's the bridal garments? The bridal garments are the way in which the bride responded to the bridegroom, namely mitzvot, or the righteous actions or responses of the people of God to the God of the people. Who's attending the wedding? Well, you would think in this greater context then other heavenly beings would be what would normally come to mind.
Like creation.
Yes. Let's enlarge it. Created beings. So all of creation, as well as the heavenly beings or the angelic beings or whatever, the whole universe, in effect, are the wedding guests. Because what happens at the great wedding banquet of the Messianic age? It's the time. Oh, you know what? I forgot to reference this last night. Shame on me. Our Haftarah portion last night was Isaiah 66.
Yeah.
It's the time of the new heavens and the new earth. Mm-hmm. And somehow, right past me. Okay, so the wedding banquet is related to the time of the new heavens and the earth. Therefore, the whole of the renewed, restored universe becomes part of the wedding banquet, or the wedding guests. All right. Is there anything further that we haven't covered then? So, are they just angels? No. Do they include angels? Yes. The questioner asked, Yeshua said, no one comes to the Father but by me. So I don't think it's people, but the guest, that is. I'm not quite sure why that is there, unless it's a reference to those who are part of the bride, but let me remind you, as I said at the outset, although it is through Yeshua that we as followers of Yeshua have come to the Father, so to speak, it is through Yeshua that any and everyone who's part of the family of God ultimately comes. Why? Because our status or relationship with God is based and was always going to be based on what Yeshua did at his death, burial, resurrection, and ascension. And we talked about the ascension part several weeks ago in a couple of drashes. So the people who are the bride involves all those. Is that reasonably clear? Was that reasonably clear? Okay. Therefore, how fortunate are those who have been invited, the last verse says, verse 9 says, to the wedding banquet of the Lamb. Why? Because those who participate, all of creation, all of the universe, both the people who make up the bride, but the universe as a whole, angelic beings, created beings, I was even going to say happy electrons and protons bouncing around as part of the celebration. Why not?
Ions too, or are they
sure.
including the ions? That's
Of course.
good.
So basically this is just saying anyone who participates in this, all of creation who participates in this, are truly fortunate, or blessed, as sometimes English is translated here. Why? Because we've gotten to get to that point of Isaiah 66, the Haftarah for this weekend. It's the time of the new heavens and the new earth. Okay? All right. Then we turn the page.
Oh, really? You're not going to have a buffer zone here?
I don't suggest a buffer zone.
I
was just
do
going
one
to
of the
use.
anti-Semitism things.
Oh, okay. Well, I was going to use the wedding banquet part too. Well, we'll tie the wedding banquet in here as well. Okay.
Yeah, let's get a little bit away before we start, because it's almost, when you put two together, it's almost like cause and effect, and we don't want to go there.
Okay. So, which one of these delightful questions do you think?
Well, I would just read the ones we've already covered.
Go ahead.
It
I'll drink to that.
as happens many times in our recent history, what we think about, what we read about, what we listen to on the television or on our podcasts or whatever, usually emphasizes one or two at the very most things for that set of days. And then something else shocking happens, and so our attention goes over to this thing over here, and we lose track of what the original thing was that we were shocked and annoyed about, and we're turned to a new thing we're shocked and annoyed about, and then they go to a third, and they never get back to the number one thing. And where are we now with the number one problem that we were talking about? Let's say I'm picking it March. Last March we had this number one problem. Everybody was looking at it. Everybody was thinking about it. Everybody was chattering about it. Okay, and then we move on to a different topic. All right. So the problem of anti-Semitism, especially in America, has not gone away. In certain cases, it's doubled down. In other cases, it sounds more and more unreasonable to believe. Really lies about Jewish people, lies about Israel. And they become like, well, everybody knows this, when, if you would have asked 20 years ago, everyone did not know any such thing. So I think it's nice this is a list of concerns about anti-Semitic concerns that comes from more than a year ago. It's February 23, but it's been especially current in our minds since the October 6th problem. 7th. Okay. Yeah. The October 7th attack on Israel and the subsequent war after that. So here are just briefly some of the things that we've gone over. And I particularly find we need to keep going over these, because you'll start to be surprised that people will bring up, sentences or phrases when they're just talking about other things, and you'll be going, what did they just say? Because that's wrong. But I don't know what to say. And plus, it'll just make them go on and on. There's a lot of issues. But I'm just going to read these, and maybe we should go into number 6, which I don't think is as good an argument as the other ones. All right. Being a Zionist means you stand for a safe and secure Israel. That's what being a Zionist is, and has really always been. Being a Zionist means you stand for a safe and secure, because there are many, many voices in, let's just keep it in the United States. There's many voices in the United States that are saying that Zionism is evil, Zionism is bad, Zionism is racist, and none of those things are true. Is that fair enough?
Or apartheid.
Zionism means apartheid. No. No, that premise in itself is wrong. And here's a nice down and dirty, easy definition to talk about. Being a Zionist means you stand for a safe and secure Israel, period, is what it says here. If you don't agree with all of Israel's policy, that's okay. But that's a different conversation. I don't think anyone I could possibly be talking to would say that they agreed with every single one of American policies. No, we don't, do we? We really, no, we don't. In fact, even he and I might differ, although not too much, on certain policies where we're going, I can't support that. We should do this and this and this. And they should, no, we should support that because of this and this. See how Americans do. Don't paint Israel with a broad brush and claim that all Israelis believe the same thing and that all Jews believe the same thing. And furthermore, don't get the idea that all Jews who live in America approve of everything that's going on in the nation of Israel, because we don't.
Not everybody in Israel approves of what's going on.
Oh,
in Israel.
so many people in Israel do not approve of things that people in their government does, just like us here in America. Would that be safe enough to say? So we need to separate this concept of all Israelis believe the same way, and furthermore, all Israelis believe exactly the same thing that American Jews believe. All of that is ridiculous. Yes, I see that hand.
Seeing the Jews as believing all the same thing and being one homogenous group, isn't that a little bit racist to say that
Extremely.
there's no variety?
Good
Extremely.
observation.
I would say. And I think it's based on ignorance. It's not based on evil. Now, there are certain evil ideas that come out of just painting everyone with the same brush, correct? Sort of like, well, all Americans are responsible for all the racism overseas. That's not right. That's not right. And the same thing with all Israelis are responsible for everything the nation of Israel does. No. But the thing that's getting to me is the minute they start saying Jewish people all around the world agree with Israel all the time. No. Any more than I don't think if you're visiting another country abroad, and you're minding your own business, being a tourist, and somebody says, well, Americans, they all do this, and you be going, no, we fight about that. A lot of us think that's bad, and we don't want that going on. Well, you should do something about it. Okay, but there's only a limited amount that I as an individual, or even us as a congregation, say can do about it. So it's important to see people groups as separate from what they actually believe and separate from what they actually can accomplish in real life. Is that fair enough? Okay. Yeah, go ahead.
Are you done with one?
Uh-huh.
All right. I want to add two things to what, and to build on what Patrice said and Jessica's very important observation. Number one, prior to October 7th, there was a very long period of repeated demonstrations against the Israeli government by Israelis throughout the nation of Israel. And just so to put it into perspective, the particular leader of Israel, Netanyahu, is a minority leader. By that I mean more people voted against him than voted for him. If I remember correctly, he and his party achieved something like 30-some% of the vote.
I was going to say it's 20, in the 20s somewhere.
Maybe it's 20. So it's easy. It was either 2/3 or 3/4 of the Israeli people did not favor him to be prime minister, and so there were protests because of what he had been doing, and how he'd been governing before October 7th. Even after October 7th, and more so, and this has picked up more and more as we've gone along, there are continued protests in Israel against what the Israeli government, particularly of Netanyahu, have done and are doing. If you are familiar with it, the original war cabinet that was put together to include those who were not formally part of the government that is now split apart once again because of the differences that there are.
Always keep in mind that Israel is set up along the lines of the UK government. So they have a prime minister who's the mover and the shaker, and they have a president who does nothing. So I don't know about anybody out there, but I personally can't really follow how things work in a parliamentary prime minister kind of government. And so be very, very careful when you're talking about the party of this or the party of that in Israel, because they have about, 15 different parties.
Mm-hmm.
And the only rule is by bringing some of these parties, not with one party's, but
Coalitions.
a coalition together. So let's, watch what we assume and what we understand, because it may not be correct.
Oh, the second thing I was going to say is this. If you understand the term Zionism and anti-Zionism, the position that's called anti-Zionism is ultimately arguing for the fact that the nation of Israel should not exist, period.
Mm-hmm.
That there should be no Jewish state, no Jewish nation. Because if you understand Zionism correctly, as Patrice mentioned it, Zionism is simply the position that holds that there should be a state of Israel, and there should be a place where Jewish people can live safely. And if you are an anti-Zionist, then you're saying that none of that is true, none of that should be. There should not be a state of Israel. And just to make it even more clear, when October 7th took place under the, we'll just leave it as attack by Hamas. If you read the Hamas charter says exactly that. There should be no state of Israel. There should be no Jews in the land. They should be killed or exported.
It was never right for that to happen.
It was never right.
The United Nations made a big fat mistake in 1948 when they divided this Arab territory up and gave part of it to the Jewish people. That was a big, bad problem from the get-go. And how do we know they even felt that way back then? Because, was it 2 days after it was declared, they attacked Israel in what's called the War of Independence, where literally 2 days after the State of Israel was approved of by the United Nations, the Arab nations of the world started a war against them with the intent to get rid of this Jewish state. We don't want to go into this
No, that's
right
a whole
now
different
at
story.
that
But
point.
that's to make clear what Zionism and anti-Zionism mean.
Correct. And also, I want to point out that this was a United Nations vote that established the State of Israel. It was not 5 powerful countries got together like they did after World War I and divided up parts of the Arab states. It wasn't like that. This was on behalf of the entire world and the nations of the world.
If I remember right, it was November of 1947. The UN voted in the General Assembly by a vast majority to establish the nation of Israel. Israel declared itself independent in May of 48, and from the inception, as Patrice mentioned, the Arab nations attacked to try to destroy, to wipe out Israel. And in effect, what Hamas did October 7th is a replay of what took place back in 1948, or the attempted replay.
So any talk about the Jews stole the land from the Arabs, that's really not how things went at all. There was no stealing of anybody to create Israel as a nation. Okay, on to number 2. We could talk half an hour on each of these numbers, but it's just nice to remind us.
Since you said that, let me say this, just by way of numbers. From the 1840s on, the Jewish people were the largest people group in Jerusalem. From the 1840s.
There were more Jews in Jerusalem
than any other group.
And
the land that became Israel, something like 96.5% of it was land that was originally Turkish land that became Israeli land because of the establishment of the land of Israel, and it was only Turkish land because Turkey conquered it a while before.
Well, in the 1600s.
Yeah, that's why I said a while before.
Well, that means like the last week before, but no, it was in the 1600s.
Only about 3.5% of the original land was Arab land. So anyhow, we could go on and on.
You go on and on. All right. Number 2. Jews comprise only 1.8% of the population in the United States, but they're targets of 60% of the religious hate crimes in the United States. So now our emphasis is going to be more on what is a situation here in America. Yeah, the Jewish people comprise less than 2% of the population of the United States. Less than 2%. But we're just creating all sorts of 80% of the problems in America are caused by Jewish people. That was a joke.
All right, and as we reminded you when we first went over this and spent much more time on it, since October 7th, there's been an increase in anti-Semitic acts, a 300% increase. It was already on the rise. It's a dramatic rise that began about 6 or 7 years ago. And then that dramatic rise spiked by another 300% after October 7th.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. You mean 300% more of 60%? So that means
Well, yes.
3 times.
Yeah.
Okay. So more than 3 times.
Yeah.
Before it was 60%, now it's 3 times that.
Yeah. Well, 3 times 60% is 180%. So
Well, that's why I was questioning.
That's why I said there was a 300% increase since.
There's no
October
way you
7th.
could do the math for us on that?
Not without seeing the original numbers.
Okay, we'll get back to you on the math. We understood there'd be no math on Shabbat.
Yeah.
I'm just saying that because it's daytime. Do you want me to do the 3?
Yep.
All right, number 3. This is a list that was put out by by Jewbelong, Jew, capital Belong, which is a great website. If you go to Jewbelong, their emphasis is on it's a Jewish website, but its aim is at Gentile people who want to go along with the Jewish community on things, and especially intermarried families, so that intermarried families can have some sense of peace and of belonging for both sides. All right, number 3. For white supremacists, or you can call them white nationalists, or also you could call them Christo-fascists, or you can call them about 4 other terms. Jews are not white. What? He looks sort of white, doesn't he? But you have to remember, even in the 1940s, Jews were not seen as like white people. They were seen as their own racial thing and not white.
We were non-whites in this country through the 50s, possibly into the 60s.
How do you determine that? By what? How would you prove what you're saying? How do we know that?
When you were asked to define who you were, you would have certain, we might call them ethnic kind of listings.
We still have those today.
Yes, we still do. And one of the listings included, although then it wasn't called black, then it was called Negro. You had Negro, I think you had Hispanic, I think you had Indian, you had white, and you had Jewish.
See, I don't remember that list, but you are a little older and remember that list. I don't remember that. Anyway, so I know it blows people's minds because today Jewish people are lumped in with quote unquote white people, even though we're all beige. But let's not even go into that. Actually, that is held against us, or it is brought up a lot by these white supremacist white supremacists because they say they're passing as white, but they are not white. Jews are not white. How dare you treat them like they're white? So that's a whole other problem in and of itself. All right. So they hate us, these groups. All right. On the other side of the political spectrum, let's say the white supremacists, the white nationalists, and Christopher, they're on what we would call the right side. So I have to, on my right side. But on the other side of the political spectrum, what we would normally call the far left, the far left considers themselves anti-Zionist, okay? And they see Jewish people as white colonialists. And so they hate us for that. So one side sees us as not white, and the other side sees us as definitely white. And furthermore, they have usurped all the people of color and their land in the Middle East. Please, I'm asking everyone, go to Israel or get some modern movies or photographs of Israel, because you will see very quickly in Israel today, when you look down the street, you will see every different shade of skin that you can possibly find. Because Israel, like America, is an immigrant-based country. In other words, everybody came to America. Unless you were a Native American, you came from somewhere else. Everybody in Israel, unless you were there in the 1800s, you came from somewhere else. And the somewhere else includes many brown people and many black people that live and are citizens of Israel. The easiest people to point out in Israel, walking down the street, the black people, which they seem to, but here's the deal. So back in the 1980s, the Ethiopian Jews were being attacked. They were being persecuted. There wasn't a whole pile of Ethiopian Jews. And so Israel, the nation, made a decision that we're going to go rescue the Jews that are now in Ethiopia. And they literally used jet airplanes, and they flew them into Addis Ababa, the capital of Ethiopia, and they literally airlifted out Ethiopian Jews, which all look extremely African black, and brought them to Israel. And we have a whole nation of Jews that has been brought to Israel. And you know what happens when people mix together, like immigrants from all over the world? They meet each other, they meet new people, they didn't realize new people, that they didn't know these countries, they didn't know the language, but these other people, they're really cute. And they end up marrying each other. And guess what? Then that means that their kids look like, all of them, or the kids look like none of them. So, yeah, this is what happens with immigrant groups. We intermarry, and then we share all of our good parts and bad parts with each other. And so, when you're sitting on a bus, as I had a whole summer to sit on a bus and go from the place I was living over to Hebrew University, and there must have been, I would say, let's say 20 stops. And people who got on the bus and got off the bus, they had all different shades of skin. They all spoke different languages, and it was amazing, the variety. So let's not get the impression, or give the impression, that all Jews look like the cast of Seinfeld, because that's wrong, especially in Israel. As a matter of fact, there are so many Jews of color here in America that they have organizations, and they have their own issues that they're trying to work through and trying to be better known. So let's not say that all Jews are white and they all were colonizers and they're just evil like the Western white people. No, that's so not true. Very, very not true.
before you continue,
Mm-hmm.
If you were to go to Israel and spend a little time there sorting things out, you would find that there are 100 different ethnic backgrounds of people that are represented in Israel. And in fact, half the people of Israel are what we call Mizrahi, in the sense that they or their parents or grandparents grew up in Arab lands and came to Israel from Arab lands. Or let's be even more precise, were forced out of those Arab lands and so ended up in Israel. So half are, like I said, Mizrahi. The other thing to remind ourselves of is, how can you colonize a place where you have lived for 3,500 years? There has always been a Jewish presence in Israel, as many people as the authorities would allow.
Jewish people.
Jewish people in Israel. As many Jewish people as the authorities would allow at whatever particular point in time or history you were there. So there's been an ongoing presence in Israel of Jewish people. And by 3,500 years, I'm only taking us back to the time of Moses. If you go back to the time of Abraham, then you're talking about another 400 or 500 years.
Yeah, and if anybody gives you the impression that Israel was created because so many Holocaust survivors came to that part of the world because nobody else wanted them, that's not when modern Israel started, quote unquote. Because starting even in the 1870s, in the 1880s, Jews from what we would know as Eastern Europe started walking to Jerusalem and the surrounding areas in order to they hoped to find a way of peace that was not available in the ghettos in Eastern Europe. And so it starts way before World War II, obviously for 3,000 years, but even it's not because Israel is not created because of the Holocaust. And that's, I think, something that's very pernicious. That means, well, we made a mistake during that 1 year and, we should correct it. No, this has been happening for hundreds of years, that Jewish people, when they were kept out, decided that they were going to leave their home in Eastern Europe because they weren't citizens there either. They were not permitted to be citizens in Eastern Europe or in Tsarist Russia or in many, many European countries. They were not permitted to be formal citizens. And so instead of living like that, they decided to come back to their homeland, which was Jerusalem and its surrounding areas. And that was taking place way before World War II.
So again, you can't be a colonist or a colonizer of a place where you always lived.
Right, correct. Okay, number 4 is just piggybacking on, I said piggyback, on number 2. It says, Anti-Defamation League reports that there was a 34% increase in anti-Semitic incidents in the United States from 2020 to 2021.
And again, remember, this came out in early 2023. That's why you don't have any 2022 figures.
Correct.
And then add the 300% increase that we talked about before.
Yeah. As a matter of fact, we will share about our own synagogue. So, not last September, but was it last September? This year's Yom Kippur? This year's Rosh Hashanah? Rosh Hashanah. So just 8 months ago or so, our synagogue, our little synagogue, it's really not big, here in Clearwater, Florida, not the hub of the Jewish community in the United States, got a bomb threat during our services for Rosh Hashanah. We were just minding our own business, so we were about to start listening to the sermon when the police literally walked into our sanctuary and said, we all have to get out because we've heard a credible response that we have a bomb. This was way before October 6th, wasn't it?
7.
What? way before the incident in October. Way before then, weeks before then. And so this uprising in anti-Semitism has not just been since October.
Right.
It's been building and building for the past 4 or 5 years. And we even had experience with this kind of thing. And we did not blow up. In case you were wondering, our synagogue did not have a bomb and it did not blow up. Just trying to clear that up. But it did really happen. And we were in contact, very close contact with the Clearwater Police. And the Clearwater Police were very kind to us and very helpful, very supportive. And they still continue to drive around and come into our parking lot and sort of check and see that everything's okay, which they were not doing prior to the bomb threat. So, we have experienced our own selves this uprising in anti-Semitism. And it turns out that the person who phoned this in to the Clearwater Police has been doing it, or his buddies have been doing it all around the country to synagogues, and they don't have any bombs. They're just trying to scare us. Their prime objective is to scare Jews. So I don't think we're scared. Okay, we're not scared.
That would be a good place to close. We're not scared.
We're not scared. Well, I have moments.
Okay.
But we don't live, it would be different if we lived in hubs of Jewish populations in America. Then we might be more nervous and worried and everything, but we don't. The east coast of Florida has far more percentage of Jewish population than we do on the west coast of Florida. It's a whole different culture over here, and we like it that way. I think both sides like it the way we have it, but we're not worried. We're not worried yet.
Okay.
Does that mean we're done for that?
Yeah, I think we're done for
We're
tonight.
done.
Yeah, look at it.
Yes, I see that.
Although
That's a little fast. Yeah, let's not get into that other topic. Do I want to mention what the other topic is?
You can, or I will.
Well, sometimes I get the feeling that some of the questions that people send us are just designed to get us in trouble when we answer them. Because, you and I do not have your regular, average, ordinary, cliched answers that people are taught. And so when we give what we've come to over the years, because trust us, we've had to change a lot of things about what we believe when we first got married, and that's okay, because we've learned tons and tons, and I think we see the reason why we needed to change our beliefs based on what we'd learned. But it just seems like certain of the questions, if we answer them honestly, we could just feed you back the normal teaching on it that you would hear at any church down the street. And, you might not, your life might not be worse for that. You might not ever find out. But I don't think we could look at ourselves in the mirror. Or I look at you, or you look at me. So we're going to be honest. And unfortunately, honesty sometimes leads to being told that you're out of the faith. We're not afraid of that. Are we afraid of it? No. That's okay. But you can see how we might get into trouble based on the kinds of answers that we give in a forum like this.
Yeah,
But we're not going for anybody's approval.
Yes,
we're not trying to get approval.
Right. Somebody can easily get offended because what we're answering does not necessarily line up with what they've been taught.
And the most godly person that they know taught them this other way of understanding it. And therefore they cannot possibly believe us, because that would be defying every single thing that they've ever believed that God taught them. Okay, fair enough, but that doesn't really make us change our answer. Because evidently we didn't meet this fabulous supersonic person that you knew that could not possibly teach anything that was wrong. And by the way, I don't think that you and I say that we are not teaching anything that's wrong. I think we have to realize that in 15 years we might go, hey, remember when we said that? That was not cool. have to do that as it pops up in our discussions. Is that fair enough to say? So,
Okay. Do you have any questions?
any questions? Any answers? No? Okay.
All right, then why don't you close in prayer?
Avinu Malchenu, our Father and our King. You are a great God, and it is a privilege to serve you. We thank you and praise you that we live in the times that we do. Father, we know these are unique, individual times with struggles that other generations have not seen, but we thank you that you've put us here. You keep preparing us, and you keep giving us blessings and direction and education. We do thank you for all those things. Pray that you be with us, our families, our loved ones during the upcoming week, and we know we can entrust them into your hands. B'Shem Yeshua Meshachenu, in the name of Yeshua, our Messiah. Amen.
And thank you all.